Well, who are the worst VCs to work with
Wow.
on a legal basis, right?
Hey guys, welcome back to Founders Talk. I'm Rachel, your friendly startup lawyer, and in this video, we have a very special guest, Jeremy Au.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. So a little bit about myself. I went to UC Berkeley, studied my undergraduate there on technology, economics, and business. Then after that, went to Bain to work as an associate consultant across Southeast Asia, primarily on consumer and tech. And then after that, I went to build my first company, which was a social enterprise, a consultancy for the social sector. Grew that out to over 100 clients. And then eventually went off to Harvard to do my MBA. Then there, I built a second company in education tech. Grew that out across pre-seed, seed, Series A, expanded that across Boston and New York, and eventually sold the company. And then eventually, after years as a GM there, I went and returned back to Singapore and became a VC at Monk Hill Ventures. In parallel, I've also set up a podcast during the pandemic called the Brave Southeast Asia Tech Podcast, which you have been a guest of.
Check it out, yeah.
Just a couple of great episodes. And yeah, happy to share about my experience today from the founder side, from the VC side, and as an ecosystem builder side.
So I guess the first question I have for you, Jeremy, is does the MBA actually help you in the business building process? Because I think some of the founders would have considered, hey, I'm working in a very nice MNC at the moment. Do I have to do an MBA course in order to be an effective business person?
The short answer is yes. The MBA fundamentally is a school where it has the professors, the academics, and the curriculum and the network to help you, get to where you want to be, especially in a business domain. So for myself, I had been at Bain as an associate consultant, and so that was a dream job for many folks. And I realized that was not the dream job for myself.
I was rejected from Bain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
They did this arithmetic test for me, and I just sat there with my primary school model, and the guy just looked at me, and he's just like, "Nah, you're not gonna make it."
oh no, yeah. You got to practice for that, unfortunately, a lot. And so I think there's the awkward reality is that I had a job. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the people there, but I just felt like I wanted to do more on technology and the frontier.
Yeah.
So that was one side of it. And then I had gone off to build a social enterprise, and I realized that I really enjoyed it as well. But I also wanted to do something a little bit different. So I think the Harvard MBA program allows you that space to think, and they surround you with resources, role models, and great professors who are really there to help you, I think, navigate your career track from one where, you're climbing the ladder in a little sense, to saying like, okay, what ladder do I want to climb? So be it being a founder or something else in the business domain. But what's been interesting to see over the past 5-10 years, and as you start looking at different alumni, people start to really kind of like click, which is they find out what career they want to have now, and also how to accelerate. And so it's interesting to see that our network, our cohorts are starting to become
Billionaires.
Well, not necessarily, some people will get there. I think that's inevitable. It's just that some of us also realize, I was just talking to someone, it's like we have other goals, right? Some of us have goals for family, some of us have goals for a business of our own. So I think it's just been interesting to see that, but the value of the network is improving. So I think it's one of those things where I think you have the opportunity to go to a top 3 MBA. I think take the opportunity and go for it.
So Jeremy, could you share a little bit more about what the seed fundraising process was like? What were your considerations when you chose a safe instrument versus, a convertible loan note or a price round? And what was your experience like? Was it difficult to pitch, or was, money quite easy then?
Yeah, so I think what was interesting was that, we had done a safe round for the pre-seed, and that was primarily friends and family. And so it was a relatively tight dynamic. We obviously did go out to pitch to angels as well. And I think I was very much like many first-time founders learning the ropes about how to fundraise as well. What was interesting was going to the second stage for the seed was, pitching to institutional seed VC funds in
the US.
Boston, in the US and New York and SF. That was a different experience because then you move away from, friends and family who are just willing to sign.
I need your friends and family.
Well, I mean, they trust you, right? So then, that's the conversation that you have on that side.
What were the terminologies in your first fundraise which tripped you up a little bit?
Yeah, I think the question that was always top of mind was really about valuation.
Yeah. I get that from my clients as well. All they care about is valuation, everything else is the same.
Yeah, everything else was like, okay, is this normal? And then I'm like, representations and waivers. Oh, okay, it's a normal, yeah, sure.
Yes.
But it was very much, I think, the top line in terms of like, frankly, is this a high valuation or is this a low valuation? Because I think it's actually quite straightforward to think about it, is that at the end of the day, you're selling a percentage of your company, right? And so for a certain amount of money and a certain amount of valuation, you give away a slice of the company. And so obviously, if you're building a company, how much is that worth versus the cash that's there? I think it's a very amorphous and obviously a tangible thing to negotiate, but also actually quite symbolic as well, because you want it to be higher because I feel like an owner, and then so forth. So I think it's an interesting dynamic where now that I've been both a founder as well as a VC on the other side of the table, I think I have a very different view of how that process goes now.
But you mentioned something quite interesting just now. You said that your perspective about certain things change as you become a VC founder. What were some of the perspectives that changed for you as you sort of like moved from a founder to a VC?
I think one of the first things that we had to do as a VC was kind of look at the standard legal package that we're going to write and assign. And I remember looking at this document, and I had seen this document obviously from the perspective of a founder, and we're discussing it with the lawyers and the VCs, and I realized I was always consistently on the side of the founder because I had this perspective of the founder. And what was interesting was to learn from the VC perspective of what those valuation control rights actually mean for the VC itself. For me, the biggest realization is that VCs do have a business responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to the LPs to make money and to be betting on the future, and to be compensated fairly when there is a power law event, but also to be able to wind down gracefully in the majority or default scenario, which is that the company shuts down or effectively closes down gracefully. And so there's an interesting set of debate around valuation, which is more about how to get control and have shared upside. And then there's on the other side of control rights, which normally when things are going well, control rights are not really important.
No.
And then when things are going badly, then control rights become very, very important. And so I think from my perspective, I think the lens that I got was, at the end of the day, I think something magical happens when you have a great founder and a great VC, is that you're creating more pie, right? And so it's very fair to figure out how to share that pie, and you can afford to be generous in how you share the pie, but also be generous about the fact that you don't need to exercise those control rights. So I think that's one dynamic that's pretty important.
What are the different terminologies that you see in the documents, as well as your hopes for the region?
The reality is that Southeast Asia is an earlier, less mature ecosystem than San Francisco. I mean, when I was in the US, everybody knew that San Francisco was the most mature ecosystem, and that New York was catching up, and then Boston was another tier below, right? And so I think let's have that frank conversation, right? That we are not Silicon Valley.
We are better than Silicon Valley.
I would say maybe not. I think there's a lot of great opportunities because there are a lot of fundamental problems in Southeast Asia, right? We need to build up more infrastructure, we need to build up more food, we need to build up more energy, we need to build out more of our digitization, our services, our consumer dynamics. So there's a lot of fundamental opportunities that are really open right now for Southeast Asia. It's just that we acknowledge that the technology ecosystem, the capital funding ecosystem, the talent ecosystem is just an order of magnitude earlier than that of Silicon Valley. And so I think it's really important for us to be thoughtful and just kind of say like, hey, the Silicon Valley playbook doesn't play well necessarily in Southeast Asia if you're not aware about why it's being done. And the truth is, Silicon Valley is pumping out all this top leadership.
Yeah.
And at some level, I'm just like reading something and I'm just like, wait, does this work here? Grab and Gojek were able to be localizations of Uber.
Yeah.
They were fundamentally tackling the question about how do I get from point A to point B, and how does something travel from point B to me at point A.
Yeah.
So that was a fundamental insight that they took from Uber. But what's interesting is that Grab and Gojek were able to outcompete Uber because they were better localized. And they said, this is a part of the playbook that doesn't work. We have to work with Gojeks. We have to work with local devices, local culture requirements. And so I think that's an easy aspect about thinking about that. And then I think the companies that are starting to survive are those that quickly figured out and said, okay,
how to localize
and adapt and keep the things that's actually working and drop the things that's not.
Thanks, Jeremy, for sharing all these perspectives. My final question for you is, you've been doing lots of podcasts, and obviously that requires a lot of effort. What is your aim and your goal with this podcast?
Coming back to Southeast Asia, I realized that that diet of podcast was very American centric, and there was really nothing that existed in Southeast Asia about Southeast Asian stories with a Southeast Asia lens. And so from my perspective, I was at some point was like, being entrepreneurial. I was just like, you know what, I'll do it myself.
Yes.
And so I remember the first 50 episodes was just me in the pandemic, just recording episodes with my friends, right? My former co-founders, past people in my network, people I respected, my old mentors. And then for some reason, people liked it. And then I kept going, right? I think about it as I want to keep going as long as I keep enjoying it, because at the end of the day, I'm still always the first listener of every podcast episode. I think that I really want to follow my curiosity and talk to the people I admire and be inspired myself by those stories. And I just happen to record them, and so other people get to hear those stories as well.
Super. Before you leave, what are 3 questions you might want to ask me, since this is part of your podcast too?
Number 1, what is the bell curve of terms that you see across your companies? So not necessarily what standard,
yes,
but I thought that was a great report that I got to see in the US. They were able to identify what percentage of the fundings they saw. They'll be like, okay, 20% had this clause, 50% did not have this clause, 30% had a weak version of this clause. So for me, I'm kind of curious, if we were to go clause by clause, what's the shape of that?
The bell curve is like this, and my arm is not long enough. But I think that what you mentioned just now made a lot of sense. I think a lot of lawyers look at their documents and they look at the terms that they are thrown at that particular transaction. But there were 2 things that you said during this episode that makes my mind kind of tick. The first thing is looking at these terms from the founder's perspective on what is important. You said valuation is the most important. So maybe creating a chart of like, okay, what are the 7 key things you need to look out for in your term sheet in terms of priority could be helpful. And number 2, the common denominator. Obviously, that bell curve will look different at different economic junctures.
Right.
Just taking the last 3 years as an example, we have seen the same amount of money being wired, but for very different terms. Just using board seat as an example, we can see $15 million US being wired to our client with 0 board seats. And that's not to say that there was no governance in place. There were information rights that the investor will ask for. From their perspective, this is a small deal, and they did not want a board seat because it also, perhaps on the flip side, also exposes fiduciary duties to them as well. On the other hand, we had also very small check sizes like 800,000 demanding 2 board seats. To answer your question, huge bell curve. But at the end of the day, founders only care about valuation. So, second question.
If you are a company, for example, in Manila, but you're running domestic operations, I'm just kind of curious what percentage would go for the US, what percentage would go for Singapore, how would a holdco be structured, and what would be the operating company be structured as well? I
mean, because I'm a Singaporean, I have to say, yes, incorporate your company in Singapore. The key considerations founders might want to have at this point is tax considerations. Because once you incorporate a company in the US, I think your tax considerations become a heavy part of your day-to-day operations. The second key thing to think about is the tensions that's happening globally. It's probably something we cannot be PC about, and it does impact people's decision to invest in your company as well as how they want you to structure your transaction. So choosing a pretty neutral jurisdiction like Singapore is helpful, because I think for now, we are sort of like the Switzerland in Southeast Asia. And for now, it is still quite safe to have your holding company in Singapore and still be considered a neutral zone. So from that perspective, that is helpful. The only slight downside, I would say, is when it comes to listing or perhaps raising funds from investors in the US, they may expect you to have a company incorporated in the US, both for their own tax purposes as well as for the potential exit plan. But I don't think that is something that you have to worry in your pre-seed to Series B stages, because that is something you would want to consider as a restructuring process as you approach your exit. Third question.
Well, who are the worst VCs to work with on a legal basis, right? But, I'm just saying, like, what's the bad behavior that you've seen from VCs without naming names?
Yeah, I'll name them. I'm just kidding. No, I think most of the VC funds start with good intentions. And obviously, they have their own LPs to report to. A lot of the VC fund founders themselves have pumped in money to build the company or build the fund, right? So they have got their own money in the line as well. But there are perhaps two general observations. The first observation is some of the VC funds are quite young. So they were still figuring out how they wanted to treat their portfolio companies, what sort of terms they wanted to use. I think the ones that made me feel highly uncomfortable were VC funds who, not their fault, perhaps the fault of the legal counsel they're engaging, who use private equity deal terms to dictate the VC deal, because private equity deal terms are also investment documents, but they are premised on a large stake. Like, we're going to invest 100 million in your company for 40% of your company, and then we expect an exit within 7 years on the premise that this is a company that actually generates revenue and profit when we invest in you. So the investment model that VC and PE funds operate are quite different, and the investment documents that are used for PE deals should not be used for VC deals. That's just my personal perspective. The second thing is on perhaps the hires. So not just VC funds, but maybe some of the incubators, the founders started with good intentions, and I'm sure the people that they hire to also operate with good intentions. But when they do hire people who don't have experience either in starting a company or investing in companies, they sometimes give ridiculous terms to the founders. And then they wear the "I'm a VC" label to bully them.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so I've seen behavior which I don't think is like really encouraging, or I've seen founders being sort of like feeling they're very cornered, or being threatened to say like, these are our standard terms, why aren't you accepting it? You know, this is very basic, you should be signing it tomorrow. I do think that any founder should be given the chance to understand the deal that they're signing. And I think the worst situation that they could put themselves in is if they were coming in with good intentions, but then, you know, there's a clause that says that the founder is going to be personally liable for the $2 million investment. I don't think many founders will have $2 million sitting in their bank account. On the other hand, I've seen really good VC funds, and particularly VC fund founders who have had experience as founders before. And it's just really encouraging to see the ecosystem evolve over time. But all VC funds are wonderful, of course.
It's just that some VC funds are more wonderful than others.
Yeah, that's right. So we hope you enjoyed this video. And if you liked it, remember to like it, share, and subscribe both to our channel and to
www.bravesea.com, Brave Southeast Asia Tech Podcast.
There we go. Have a good day. Bye.